Thank you. And this is a segment that they had asked me to do when I started with Southwest Radio back in the end of October this past year. So just been with the ministry a few months now and excited about the doors that God is opening up. I was talking in conversation with some of the folks throughout yesterday and today. I wasn't looking for this position. God just opened up a door in an unexpected way. Seemed to align my values, my doctrine, my beliefs, the things that God had laid on my heart with the vision of Southwest Radio. And God just really opened up this door for me to serve with the ministry. But the One World Update is really one of the presentations that I like to give, and it's constantly changing. I am constantly going back over this, adding new material, taking out things that I'd mentioned before, because we see this happening on such a quick pace. And we're going to be talking about some of the things that are happening in this world and the rise of the one world mind. This is a book that I'm writing, and it should be out in about November of this year, really looking at the philosophy of what I'm talking about today. Today I'm going to be sharing a lot of screenshots from governments, from organizations, showing you how that this one world globalist system is beginning to take shape in our world today. And the book that I'm writing will be called The Rise of the One World Mind, which is exploring the philosophy behind a lot of the things that we see happening in corporations, in governments, in groups like the World Economic Forum. We're going to talk about them some today as well as we go through this. What we watch for: one world government, one world religion, one world economy. And we see all these things in Scripture, and that's where we want to begin as we look at who is going to lead it. The Antichrist, Satan, the false prophet. Revelation 13 speaks about that. And this is where we want to go. But before I read Revelation 13, I was reading this morning in Revelation chapter 1. This is a verse a long time ago that I circled, I underlined, I put a star next to it in my Bible. Revelation 1:1, the revelation of Jesus Christ. It's not the revelation of the Antichrist, the beast, and the false prophet necessarily. It's primarily the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified it by his angel unto his servant John, who bare record of the word of God and of the testimony of Jesus Christ, and of all the things that he saw. Blessed is he that readeth, and blessed are they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand. There's an urgency to this, and you'll hear that urgency through what we share today. But keep in mind, this is the revelation of Jesus Christ. From beginning of the book of Revelation to the very end, it's about how Jesus is unfolding his plan for the ages. Men come up with schemes, come up with agendas, come up with plans, but ultimately it's God and his eternal plan that is unfolding. If you were with us yesterday as I spoke about fake Jesus, and those people who said, let's kill Jesus, let's put him on that cross, they were ultimately advancing the plan of God, and they didn't even realize it. They thought they were accomplishing their plan. We're going to see the exact same thing in the end times. It's the same thought process, that we are advancing our agenda, we are advancing our philosophy. No, it's God who is advancing his kingdom, his plan, and it's been set down for us for a couple thousand years in the pages of Scripture. So let's get into Revelation 13. It talks about the one world government, one world worship, one world economy. Revelation 13:1, I stood upon the sand of the sea. I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the names of blasphemy. I believe Revelation is the best commentary on itself. When you start reading about the 7 heads and the 10 horns, you're like, what is this talking about? Keep reading. Revelation often explains its own symbolism and tells you what this is. But for the sake of time, I'll just explain it for you. This is a coalition of rulers, the 7 heads, 10 horns, And as we look at the book of Daniel here in just a second, we're going to see that there's one who begins to rise to the top, and this will be the Antichrist of the end times. So Revelation 13 is describing the Antichrist and his system that comes up. One world government, this coalition of rulers, 7 heads and 10 horns. Compare Revelation 13:1 to Daniel 7:16 to 24. Now, for this, I've just got 2 of those verses, 19 and 20, on the screen, but the whole context is Daniel 7:16 to 24, and you can find a lot of truth there. Let's read 19 and 20 out of Daniel 7. Then I would know the truth of the 4th beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, again, Revelation speaks about the 10 horns, Revelation 13 that we just read, and of the other that came up before whom 3 fell, even of that horn which had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout, more strong than his fellows. So this one horn rises up, and this will be the Antichrist of the end times. Going back to Revelation 13, the Antichrist will rule over all the nations. He will rise to the top and become the ruler over this one world system. Verse 7 describes that it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. There will be a one world religion that emerges at this time. Revelation 13 verse 4, they worshiped the dragon, that's Satan, and gave power to the beast, the Antichrist. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? You know, I've often wondered, why would people worship Satan? Why would people give in to this end times worship of Satan? In our country today, the rise of the Wicca movement, there's some U.S. Census data that goes back 30-some years, and it was just a couple hundred, a few hundred people who identified as being part of the Wiccan movement. You fast forward 30 years to where we are as of, it was a few years back, the latest data, and we were well over 1 million people who identified as part of the Wiccan movement. So in the last 30 years, over 1 million people have joined into the Wiccan movement, which is part of the New Age movement as well. We see this advancing. Ultimately, it's a worship of self. We're going to come back to some of the hallmarks of this one world system of worship. What is the mindset behind that? And we'll talk about that as we go through this today. Revelation 13, 16, 17, and 18 talk about the one world economy that will be here in the end times. And by the way, I believe that we're living in these days, but we are not in the time of the Great Tribulation. These things are all still future. We see these things setting stage, and that's really what I'm doing for you today, seeing how the stage is being set as we are progressing closer and closer to this. We are not in this passage of Scripture. This is still future. This will be during that 7-year Great Tribulation period that this will happen. And I'm just going to show you today how that we are moving in that direction. Verse 16 tells us, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. Now the word in here has a broad range of meaning. It can also mean on. As of right now, I don't think it's going to be something that's surgically implanted. I know people talk about the chips and different things like that that could be surgically implanted. Certainly, that could happen down the road. There's technology advancing in that way. But some of the things I'm going to show you today is how that they're using biometric scans. If you've got a smartphone and you don't even have to type in a passcode, it scans your face, it recognizes who you are, you can unlock your phone. And we're seeing that come into fruition. Scanning of the face, your hand, your palm, your fingerprints are unique. And I'm going to show you something that's really cool, and I'm not going to talk about it yet because I got a picture later on I want you to see. But we see that you know, just scanning your hand, scanning your palm, and being able to do it that way. I don't think it has to be surgically implanted. And the scripture here, the word in, can also be translated as on, without doing damage to the text of Scripture or violating Scripture in any way. So it does not necessarily mean in as in terms of a chip that has to be implanted into you. Just FYI. And 17, that no man can buy or sell it unless he has the mark or the name of the beast, the number of his name. The next verse goes in to describe the famous 666. So how is our world moving this way? How are we moving towards a one world government? We're going to start there, then we'll go to the one world economy, and we'll go to the one world religion. How is the stage being set as we're progressing in this way? The one world government, the digital push. Our government is moving to digitization very, very rapidly. And now I'm not against technology. I'm not anti-technology. We're using technology. I'm using a microphone. I just pulled out my cell phone. We're live streaming over the camera. We're using these TVs, screens, PowerPoint. We can utilize technology to advance the gospel. You can use technology as a good tool, but can also be turned into a weapon used against us. And the name of the game in this end-time scenario is control. Ultimately, the Antichrist will use it as a tool to control people. And that's the name of the game, is control. So the UN puts out a list of countries that have the highest e-government development score among its 193 members. Just FYI, there's just over 200 nations in the world. 193 of those are part of the UN, the United Nations. So which countries have the highest e-government development scores among the UN's 193 member nations? Now this text is going to be a little bit small, so I'll tell you what it says. Number 1 is Denmark, and number 2 is Finland. South Korea, the Republic of Korea, is number 3. New Zealand, number 4. Sweden, number 5. Iceland, number 6. Australia, number 7. Estonia, number 8. Netherlands, number 9. Coming in at number 10, United States of America, Great Britain right below us at number 11. So we are in the top 10 moving in this direction among the nations of this world. So we're right smack dab in the middle of this move to digitization. What does this digital movement look like? And in Denmark, for instance, they call it their EID, MIT ID, which is just Danish for my ID. It's a key that unlocks access to taxes, education, insurance, healthcare, banking, utilities. So we're using utilities, we're using lights, we're using lots of electricity. If you don't sign up on their program, guess what? Your utilities are shut off. You don't have access to utilities. You don't have access to healthcare. You don't have access to insurance. You don't have access to money. You don't have access to education. You see, the name of the game is going to be control. And of course, they're advancing all the pros, but never talking about the cons that come up. The benefits, they talk about improving access to your lifestyle. You don't have to go to a government building and stand there from 9 to 5 or try to get in when it is least convenient for you. You can be anywhere in the world 24/7. Just pull it up on your phone, etc., and do the business that you need to do. And they get rid of all the paperwork, and it helps them move to what they call a green transition. Climate change that we hear so much about is ultimately part of this whole agenda. Folks, it's all connected together. It's not climate change here, government here. I see it as all connected together, and I'm going to show you some more things along those lines as we go forward. South Korea, another one in the top 10. Welcome to digital government. And they've got videos that talk about it on there. These are screenshots from official websites. This is a screenshot from South Korea's official website for their digital government platform. So for instance, if a woman is pregnant and wants prenatal vitamins, she goes through this digital government. It shows up on her doorstep, and there you go. Very convenient, all the rest. Australia, also in the top 10. They have like a 3-tier program, and basic all the way to advanced. So the more private information you give over to the Australian government, the more access to services and things that you get. If you give them a scan of your face and different things like that, your biometric data, then you unlock a lot of doors for yourself and, being able to interact with their government platforms. And there's videos, again, screenshot from their website. You can go and look this up and watch the videos all you want to. An easy and secure way to prove who you are online is the way that they're advertising this. MyGov ID in Australia. Estonia, a small European country just west of Russia. We have built a digital society, and we can show you how. Estonia's goal is to be a model for other nations who are developing their e-governments. Back some 10 plus years ago now, they developed something that they called a digital ID. Well, and even beyond that, a digital citizenship. So people from other countries can still be a citizen of Estonia. Basically, they're opening their borders and allowing people to be a citizen of their country, no matter where they live in Europe or beyond. And that's going to tie back into what we're going to talk about in just a minute. So again, another screenshot. I know the text is very small, but down here in the bottom left-hand corner, it's a quote on Estonia's website from the New York Times. The role model for governments should be Estonia, a country where almost every bureaucratic task can be done online. So the New York Times is saying Estonia needs to be our role model. So what do we see happening in the USA? Login.gov. I'm not sure, any of you familiar with login.gov? Okay, a couple of you, yeah. And so this is a new thing that's ramping up, and more things are going to be added to login.gov as we go forward. This is the United States, one account, the public's one account for government. That's the goal of login.gov. Anything you need to do with the government, it's going to be through login.gov. I want to show you something else from login.gov as we go forward. This is also here. Right now, it's just a username and a password to get you access to it. But they also say some of the things that you want to interact with the government, you have to prove who you are. You have to upload a picture of your identification, your driver's license, your state-issued ID, to get access to certain things. I was talking along these lines in my home church, and we have a couple of people who are accountants. One of them, a lady in our church that owns her own accounting firm, came up to me after I spoke, and she said, "Have you heard of ID.me?" No, fill me in about it. So basically, the IRS had set up their own version of this called ID.me, and some of her clients, she was having to get their driver's license and upload that to the IRS to prove who her clients were, and this is the IRS requiring this. Well, the IRS backpedaled because they had a lot of people say, "Nope, we do not want to do this. You're invading our privacy. This is not your right to ask these things." So they backpedaled a little bit, and I've got a screenshot from their statement. This is officially on the IRS website. They backpedaled off of the ID.me, but they're moving to login.gov. So they're going to be asking for this down the road. Just get ready for that. When you're asked when you file your taxes to register your ID, it's going to register your facial recognition. And these things are coming down the line here in America. In America, there's a digital push for IDs. The state of Arizona was the very first state to issue a digital identification. And in Arizona, if you've got an Apple smartwatch, you can walk up in Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, scan your Apple Watch, get straight on the plane. No more waiting in line. You've already proved who you are. That's very nice, isn't it? Again, I'm not anti-technology. I'm not saying these things are all evil or of the devil. I'm just saying this is the direction that we're moving. And I believe the Antichrist will be able to use this to weaponize it to control people in the end times. I'm just showing you how we are progressing, how the stage is being set in that way. Utah did the similar thing, and somebody asked one of the directors over Utah's Department of Public Safety, can the government track every time somebody shows their ID or their facial recognition is scanned or whatever it may be? And he said, yes, it does produce a ping, but that's not something that we're interested in tracking. You know, and I'm sure he was probably being truthful in that. They don't look at that. They're not interested in tracking. But could they track that? Absolutely. And that's the thing with the digital currency that we're going to talk about. That's the thing with these digital IDs, is that you can be tracked. Everything can be tracked. Everything can be controlled. With cash, there's anonymity there. You can buy something with cash and it's not tracked who you are and what you bought and everything else. But when everything is digital, it can be controlled, it can be tracked, it can be shut off. They don't want you buying certain things. And for instance, when COVID happened and they were telling us stay at home, stay in, what if the government decided to put a block on your bank account to where you couldn't purchase anything with outside of a 5-mile radius or a 2-mile radius or a 1-mile radius, whatever they decide, of your home? They shut you off. You don't have cash. You can't go buy something. You need something. You can't travel. Everything is restricted. Everything is controlled. And again, I'm not a fear monger. I don't like to be a fear monger, but I'm just showing you the kinds of things that could happen down the road. Many people have their eyes closed to the changes and the things that are happening around us. And that was my story as just a couple years ago. My eyes were closed to a lot of the things that were just happening around me. But as my eyes began to be open, I began to realize, my goodness, look at how the stage is being set for these end times things to really happen. So available in a state near you. These are states that already have the digital ID available: Arizona, Colorado, Delaware. I feel like Johnny Cash when I go through. I've been everywhere, man. I can't do it as fast as he did. But so these are states where it's available. Coming soon to a state near you: California, Connecticut, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Kentucky, New Jersey, Ohio. These are the ones developing it, although there's a lot more that are testing it, thinking about it, that kind of thing. So when the states start talking about something, you know who gets involved? The federal government. So it's a couple screenshots from congress.gov. Your neighboring state here in Illinois, there's a U.S. representative, Democrat Bill Foster, that has pushed this bill for several years. It's not passed through the House yet, but every year it's reintroduced. And I know the text is very small. Let me read it for you. H.R. 4258, Improving Digital Identity Act of 2021. As I said, this is something that gets reintroduced every year. Unless you think I'm picking on the Democrats. This year, just a couple weeks ago, March 29th, 2023, the U.S. Senate Bill 884, Improving the Digital Identity Act of 2023, the exact same name. The Arizona Senator Kristen Sinema produced this, and down at the very bottom, that's why I've got the text on here, Miss Sinema for herself and Miss Loomis, which is a Republican from Wyoming. So Democrat, Independent, Republican, they're all promoting this as a way to prevent fraud, as a way to bring greater security, and as a way to put a standard out there for the states to follow. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad bill or anything else. I'm just making you aware of the kinds of things that are happening. So this is some of the promises that they're telling us. It's standardized. It's user-friendly. You get accesses to services anytime, anywhere. It reduces fraud and ID theft. The government will save money. We'll protect the environment. We will solve border security issues. And I think the environment, border security, all these things are tied in together. I don't think our current administration is being dumb in what they're doing in their approach to the border. I think it's part of the globalist agenda. Anyone who puts America first is going to be opposed. In the globalist mindset, that is taking our country backward. That is taking our country in a direction we shouldn't go. That's the globalist mindset. That's what I'm writing my book about, is that anyone who is pro-America or America first is the enemy. And we're going to be called fascists, and we're going to be called every other name in the book, and that's a term that they're using right now. We see that happening. And so what's going on at our southern border is intentional. And we see that happening. This is a screenshot from the U.S. Department where they track the numbers. And I know the numbers are hard to see, and I'm not really going to spend time. I just want you to see that this is being tracked. And I use these numbers to come up with this chart on the next page. So in 2019, over here on the far left, it starts in about 2019 to the very latest data, and you can see the major spike. And at the top of the peak just a couple months ago, we got over 300,000 border crossings into America. 300,000 in 1 month in America. And so we see this happening. Again, it's an intentional way to erase the borders. We can all be global citizens. They don't want there to be an America citizenship or Denmark or any other country. They want it to be a one world citizen, that we can freely come and go wherever we want to around the world. But that also can be controlled if it falls into the wrong hands. So healthcare. How many of you serve in the healthcare, work in healthcare sector? A couple people, okay. You're probably more familiar about this than I am. I used to work in healthcare. My brother's an anesthesiologist, and so we got some of the medical things in the family. But for the very first time, the ICD, which is part of the World Health Organization, the ICD is their international classification of diseases. So if you go to the doctor for a sinus infection, there's a numeric code for your sinus infection, or for like what we had happen here yesterday. They have a numeric code that they would put into his chart and explain exactly what happened. So for the very first time, the World Health Organization says this code is fully electronic for providing access to over 17,000 diagnostic categories with over 100,000 diagnostic index terms. And so this is a globalized system. So now America does not have our own numeric code that we go by in healthcare. It's a global numeric system. That way, if what happened here yesterday, for example, happened in Russia or happened in England or happened in South Korea, they would use the exact same code across the world. And we see, again, these things are tying together as we see these things taking shape. Our one world healthcare system. If you remember this from back, I think it was Valentine's Day, February 14th, Joe Biden said something and people latched onto it as saying, you know, the U.S. has given up its sovereignty and turned over sovereignty to the World Health Organization when it comes to pandemics. Did any of you hear that news story or see some of that, a couple of you? And so this was a screenshot from the USA Today. Their fact checkers were out in force, and they were saying, oh, it wasn't really that, it wasn't that, it wasn't that. We didn't give over sovereignty. We didn't do any of that. You guys are just crazy conspiracy theorists. You know, you're out in left field. You don't know what you're talking about. It's fake news, fake news, fake news. Was it really fake news? We're going to come back to this in just a second. I'll show you some of the terminology that they're using today. So on one hand, they're saying it's false information, conspiracy theory. That's not what happened. But then on the other hand, they're slipping it in under our nose. And I'm going to show you some of the language used in this article in just a second. What's some of the problems with this digital push? Will the government be able to control, there's that word, control our lives and restrict our freedoms? What happens when this power falls into the wrong hands, like the Antichrist? So we're going to go into the one world economy and how we see these things taking shape. I'm going to talk about the World Economic Forum. What is that? What are they doing? The 2030 Agenda and the digital currency studies that are underway. How are we moving towards a digital currency? And I'm going to come back to that article I promised to in just a second because it ties in with the World Economic Forum. Who is the World Economic Forum? How many of you have heard of the World Economic Forum? Okay, most of you. That's wonderful. Sometimes I just assume people have heard of the World Economic Forum when in fact they haven't. So I'm glad most of you are aware of that. It's basically a coalition of government, of business leaders, top executives from the biggest corporations all around the world. They have a summit each year in Davos, Switzerland, and they met in January of this year, and their 2023 theme was Cooperation in a Fragmented World. And those are important terms, cooperation in a fragmented world. Thinking globally instead of thinking locally. What's the difference in thinking globally and thinking locally? Thinking locally is America first, my family, take care of my family and that kind of thing. They say, no, you got to think globally. Don't think about your country. Don't think about your business. Don't think about your health care, but think about the global whole. And how are we moving towards these things? So here's this article I promised to come back to. So they said, let me go back there. Cooperation in a fragmented world. What's the terminology? On one hand, they were saying, nope, that's false information. We did not give over sovereignty. But one of the people who wrote the accord, Lawrence Gostin, he's basically a fancy name of a lawyer from Georgetown, wrote this accord that President Biden was referring to, our partnership with the World Health Organization. And a quote from him, I've got it highlighted at the bottom of the screen. He says, the treaty would seek global cooperation in preventing and responding to a pandemic. You know, they're saying global cooperation. They're using this terminology. That's one of the things I want to open your eyes to today, is the terminology that's being used. And global cooperation is something you're going to hear a lot more. And my prayer is that when you hear these terms, that the spiritual antennae that we talked about yesterday will start to go off, and you'll say, hey, wait just a second, what are they talking about? Global cooperation, mark it down. That's one of the terms you're going to be hearing a lot as we go forward. And this came out after the World Economic Forum. All these people are connected together. It's all part of the same agenda, the same plan. So what does thinking globally look like? This was directly quotes from the World Economic Forum website talking about what did they discuss in January in Davos, Switzerland. So some of the main things, the basic tenet of the program is the premise that the current crises, as serious as they are just manifestations of larger systemic deficiencies accrued over time. That's a mouthful, I know. Basically, all that they're saying is that we've had problems for a long time. We need to take action to move in this direction to fix these things. If we don't come together now, it's all going to fall apart. That's basically what they're saying. They talk about this, and I'm not going to read this whole quote because it's another mouthful of words, but I want you to notice the last two lines, the meta trends of the fourth industrial revolution and climate change. They're saying these crises are the result of a narrow vision of systems as sectors rather than interconnected. So an example of this, and I've got some examples coming up, Ford Motor Company a couple months ago announced, this was February 14th, that they were putting a lot more money into developing electric vehicles. They're spending $3.5 billion to build electronic vehicle battery plant in Michigan in another step in auto industry shift to the U.S. And so I'm not anti-electric cars. If you got one, I'm not saying, anything about it. I like gas myself, but, you drive whatever you want to. But, this is just, again, Ford sees their role. Let me go back to this one. Their role at Ford is not just in the automotive sector. They're saying we're part of this global climate. We have to do what we can for the fourth industrial revolution and climate change. Now, if you're a Ford person, I'm not picking on Ford drivers, Ford trucks, or anything else. And they're nice, they're beautiful. But the thing is that Ford, and it's not just Ford, there's all kinds of corporations. This happened recently, so that's why I'm talking about Ford today. And we see that this is happening. I don't know if you saw it just this week. The government said that President Biden and his team, his administration, said that they wanted the automakers to really push electronic vehicles. The automakers came back and said, no, that's a too aggressive plan. We can't meet that deadline. They're talking about looking over the next 10 years. The automakers have said 50-50 electronic to other fuels. They're going to try to make it a 50-50 split over the next 10 years as we're moving towards these electronic vehicles. And so this is just Ford being part of the whole. Here's the climate cowboy himself, Al Gore. He had a lot to say at the World Economic Forum. Al Gore is on the board of directors at the World Economic Forum. You thought that some of these politicians from the 90s and the early 2000s have gone away. They haven't. They're still very much players on the world stage. Al Gore being one of those, certainly. The climate cowboy, Al Gore himself. And this is brainwashing, folks. It blew my mind when I understood the classic brainwashing techniques and lined it up with the message of Al Gore at the World Economic Forum. And not just Al Gore, but there's others who are speaking along these lines. So this was part of a speech that Al Gore was giving very passionately at the World Economic Forum. Part of the video of it sort of went viral after he gave this impassioned speech about climate change. And he said, look at the xenophobia and political authoritarian trends that have come from just a few million refugees. He's talking about the people who have come across the border. And he said, look at all this xenophobia. Look at the political authoritarian trends that have come out of just a few million refugees. What about a billion? He says there's going to be a billion people who are looking to leave their country because of climate change. They got to have a place to go. We're going to lose our capacity for self-governance on this world. We have to act. Now, with brainwashing, they use guilt to break you down to the breaking point. And we are being sold guilt, guilt, guilt. You should feel guilty for driving a gas vehicle. You should feel guilty for all the things that you're doing. You should feel guilty, guilty, guilty. And they're trying to get us to our breaking point. And I think COVID was part of that plan to see where is the breaking point. How far can we push? How much can we do at this point? So what is he saying? What's some of this brainwashing that we see on display? If we want peace and harmony in this world, we must realign our national values to welcome these refugees and fight climate change. If we do not, we are labeled as bad people. We are shamed. We are science deniers. We are xenophobes. We are enemies. We're racist. This is terminology that they're using to guilt us, to shame us, and to drive us to the breaking point. What happens when a billion people are trying to get into America? How are we going to respond? What's our economy going to do? How are we going to be able to survive a billion people trying to come into America because of climate change? You see, this is the agenda, the World Economic Forum, climate change, all these things linked together. Now, I'm going to speed through this for the sake of time. They had 5 themes at this World Economic Forum in January, and each one of them said, as I have it labeled at the very top, a new system, a new system, a new system, a new system for energy, for climate, for nature. And at the very bottom, they say that we want to help the world meet the 2030 targets. What's the 2030 targets? Where does that come from? Well, the World Economic Forum is thinking globally with the United Nations. This is a screenshot from the United Nations and their Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Transforming our world, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. How many of you heard of the 2030 Agenda, 2030 goals? Several hands. Good, good. So they've got these sustainable goals, and these aren't bad things. I had somebody ask me one time, what's bad about wanting to fight poverty? I'm not saying we don't fight it, but what I'm saying is, how are they going about this? How are they wanting us to do these things? Harari, that's, Klaus Schwab's right-hand man, and he calls us useless eaters, and they're talking about limiting the population in the globe and reducing it just to less than 1 million people in the world, and many crazy theories that are out there. And it's not just theories, these are things that they're putting in print. They're publishing books that are spelling all these things out, how they want to accomplish these goals. And so the second one was a new system for investment, trade, and infrastructure. The third one was a new system to harness technology in the private sector. So in their mind, we have to come together if we want to survive the crisis that we're facing. A new system for work, skills, and care. A new system for dialogue. And here's that word again, cooperation in a multipolar world. The geopolitical vein turned from cooperation to competition. So they're talking about the war in Ukraine, but they're also talking about any nation that's competing and sees themselves as competing with another nation. That's why they don't want people saying language like America first, or any kind of competition language is anathema to them and the globalist agenda. And so they say we need we have turned from cooperation to competition, and we need a new global system that is more stakeholder based and equipped to handle the dynamics of the 21st century. We need a new global system. This is what they're trying to accomplish. These digital currencies now, part of the one world economy, how do we see us moving to a digital currency? These are screenshots from the Atlantic Council's Central Bank Digital Currency, CBDC. That's something that you see a lot nowadays. A central bank, your money is in one bank somewhere, a central bank, a digital currency. Those two things combined together, CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency. And this is a tracker. I took some screenshots from them. I know the text is extremely small, but I just wanted you to see this isn't from Joe Schmo or, somebody down in their mom's basement that just is putting these things on the internet and I just found it, stumbled across it. No, these are official websites from these people that are putting these things out there. So it says in 114 countries, representing over 95% of the global GDP, they are exploring a central bank digital currency. So get this, in May of 2020, we're talking about 3 years ago, only 35 countries were considering a central bank digital currency. And now today, 114 countries. In 3 years, we've gone from 35 to 114 countries that are exploring a central bank digital currency. 11 countries in our world have already launched a digital currency. China has a pilot program and is going to expand to most of the country in 2023, this year. China is moving towards this very rapidly. United States of America is moving this way as well, and that's what we want to see. The Federal Reserve in New York City, it's neither federal nor a reserve, but they're testing the digital currency in the USA as we speak. Back in the fall, they launched a pilot program with several banks. I mean, we're talking about Bank of America, talking about Wells Fargo, talking about some of the biggest banks and lenders in America are involved in this pilot program. They have not yet released the findings and the statistics on how that happened, how it went, but they are testing the digital dollar system within the USA markets. Just looking at the United States and seeing how could a digital dollar work with Bank of America, Wells Fargo, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they're not just testing it in the USA. This is something that they're looking at across the world. This is another project called Project Cedar of the Federal Reserve. It's testing international digital transactions. So it's not just the US dollar that they're looking to digitize, but they're also testing how could it work? How could transactions go seamlessly in an international market? And here we go. This is one of the things I really wanted to show you. Amazon One. And this just was released recently, and I hope that you'll see this and take note of this. So a biometric scan, you can pay with your palm through Amazon One. Amazon, the global giant, has introduced this. This is a screenshot from their website. Again, this isn't something I made, something I found, but it's right there. If you go to one.amazon.com, one.amazon.com, you can find all this information right there, one.amazon.com. It's as easy as 3, 2, 1. All you need to do is hover your palm. So there's a sign-up process. You go into wherever they have these kiosks. This kiosk is about the size of a credit card reader that you'd have at the gas station or grocery store or whatever. And in the St. Louis area, they've got a couple of Panera Bread locations that have these right next to their a card reader, and they're testing it at Panera Bread. And also in California, at some of the Whole Food Market stores, they're testing it there. Amazon, in their corporate offices and places that they have, they got this set up to where Amazon employees and people who interact with Amazon, they go to one of their markets or they go to one of their places to get some food. All they have to do is scan their palm, and it's paid for. It connects to their bank account, and they're good to go. You just go, scan your palm, and you're out the door. And so we see these things happening very, very quickly. I thought this was so fascinating when I came across this. So let's move on to the third thing. We talked about the one world government. We talked about one world economy. How do we see a one world religion taking shape and taking place in our world today? Did you all see this? The Abrahamic family house opened in Abu Dhabi March the 1st of this year. So we're talking about just over a month ago. Here's a screenshot from their website. This is, again, a direct screenshot. This was the artist rendering. This is a digitization of what they envisioned, but it is built. It is open for business as of March 1st of this year. On this property, you have a Roman Catholic church, a Jewish synagogue, and a Muslim mosque in Abu Dhabi, the Middle Eastern Muslim nation. That's the fascinating thing about this. A Muslim nation built this with a Roman Catholic church, a Jewish synagogue, and they invite people of all faiths or of no faith to come there to reflect, to fellowship, etc., etc., etc. Here's an actual picture of this property that I found online. And I got the credit to the photographer down at the very bottom. Dror Baldinger is the photographer's name. It says right there, Abrahamic family house in Arabic, English, and Hebrew. And this is the welcome place where you come in, the main entrance, if you will, into this Abrahamic family house. Also in Omaha, Nebraska, they have what they call the Tri-Faith Commons, a similar property with a Jewish synagogue, Muslim mosque, and a church. That circular structure you see in the photo is called the Bridge of Abraham, a circular bridge that will connects walkways between all these places. And so this is right here in the United States of America. Breaking headlines. Here we go. I wish I had Greg Patton and his voice to give the news here. Protestant church leaders promote a program for peace. Protestant church leaders promote a program for peace. Let's see if any of you all heard this or saw this happening. Ultimately, they wanted, quote, a world government of delegated powers. Now, these are Protestant church leaders. I'm talking about Protestant pastors, Protestant denominational leaders, Protestant seminary heads and professors and things that were saying in a gathering, in a meeting, when they came together, we need a world government of delegated powers. We need a universal system of money to prevent inflation and deflation. They said we wanted a worldwide freedom of immigration, a democratically controlled international bank. They went on from there, and it gets even worse. Many duties now performed by local and national governments, quote, can now be effectively carried out only by international authority, end quote. And this isn't government leaders. This isn't the World Economic Forum. This is Protestant church leaders, Protestant pastors, and others who came together for this meeting. What was their ultimate goal? Quote, a duly constituted world government of delegated powers, an international legislative body, an international court with adequate jurisdiction, international administrative bodies with necessary powers, adequate international police forces, and provision for enforcing its worldwide economic authority, end quote. That's a direct quote from these Protestant church leaders. So I wonder, did you see these headlines? Did any of you see this news? And I don't see anybody raising their hands, and you probably won't. Did you hear about this important gathering? Time magazine published this news. When was it published? March 16th, 1942. Protestant church leaders were saying this March 16th, 1942. What was happening in 1942? World War II. So you think about, for 80 years, these things have been in motion. The scene is set and being set and being set. This was, you can go onto Time Magazine's website. I want to reference this to show you, I'm not making this up. I'm not pulling this out of thin air. They've got this copy digitized on their website. You go to Time Magazine and search Religion American Malvern. It describes a conference of the Federal Council of Churches. At that time in 1942, it was called the Federal Council of Churches. Now it's called the National Council of Churches. And so this was a statement that they made into what our world needed when we were in the middle of World War II. Protestant church leaders promoting this program for peace, and it's recorded for us in Time magazine. So what are some of the hallmarks of a one world religious system? It emphasizes a works-based religious system. It emphasizes human-centered worship. You know, follow your heart, find your truth. We got to save humanity. We got to save the planet. It emphasizes spirituality over religion. Emphasizes a higher power instead of the one true God. So where is the true church today? I see the true church as being this beacon of light. People are on boats, out on the open waves. They're looking for an answer. They're trying to find hope. They're trying to find life. And we have the way, the truth, and the life, and that is Jesus Christ. I know I've talked about a lot of dark things, and we know, as Daniel 7:21 tells us, the Antichrist rises. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. But Jesus defeats him. The very next verse, Daniel 7:22, I love it. Until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. The truth is this: Jesus wins. And I want to leave you with this message. Don't leave discouraged. Don't leave with your head hanging low. I believe the rapture of the church will be here before we see the Antichrist come onto the scene and these things take shape. My goal here is to open your eyes to what we see plainly happening in our world around us, but we've got to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. Pastor Greg said we glance at the devil, but we keep our eyes on Jesus. I'm saying the same thing. Don't get sucked into the Antichrist and all these things. Keep your eyes focused on Jesus. We have the victory. People need the gospel. If you're not right with Jesus, this is the time to get right. I share this as a warning. We need to be right with the Lord so that we meet the Lord in the air when the rapture call comes. We need that. And that's the urgency of this message, to be right with the Lord, to be saved, to know that we're saved, to do what we can to bring others into the fold so that they don't have to face this dark period under the rule of the Antichrist. But ultimately, we know Jesus wins. Sin, Satan, and the evil will be defeated forever. And that's where the book of Revelation closes. Luke 21:28. When these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. I love this verse. It's one I use all the time. When you see these things begin to come to pass, that's right where we are right now. Look up, lift up your heads, your redemption draweth nigh. A couple of resources. We have the Prophecy in the News magazine. I was privileged to write an article on rapture anxiety. A lot of people are using this phrase. You know, they grew up believing in the rapture, hearing about the rapture, and say, oh no, I missed it. You know, you walk into the house and it's quiet. Oh, did I miss the rapture? Jesus come back, and I didn't even realize it. And how do we get into that mindset? So that's part of the Prophecy in the News magazine. I'm privileged to write some articles for them, as well as my book, Fake Jesus, I talked about yesterday. Let me go ahead and wrap us up, and we'll get ready for our next session here starting in just a few minutes. And let me remind you, we do have some free copies of the Prophecy in the News magazine. Here's one on Klaus Schwab and the Global Elite. We had a bunch of these. I know many of you picked that up. This is the kind of thing that I'm sharing today we talk about in our Prophetic Observer, which is our free newsletter. If you didn't sign the registration form, sign up for that. You'll get that in your mailbox. I write articles for that with Pastor Larry just about every month. And also in Prophecy in the News magazine, we bring you up to date on a lot of the things that are happening prophetically. This was our latest edition, What If the Resurrection Never Happened? I deal with, almost like It's a Wonderful Life. Any of you seen that wonderful Christmas movie? It's a Wonderful Life, Jimmy Stewart. I won't do a Jimmy Stewart impression. I'll spare you that. Zuzu's Pedals. Okay, I couldn't resist. I had to say something about Zuzu's Pedals. Anyways, this is sort of the resurrection version of that. What if the resurrection never happened? What would the church look like? And I believe the church wouldn't even exist without the resurrection. Our timely tools that we have, this is another freebie. If you sign up on the registration, you'll get this in the mail each month. Tells you when and where we're going to be. Tells you a lot of the great resources that we have. Micah's books in there, many others. I mentioned these yesterday. These are downstairs. We're going to take a break, so you can go down there and open your hearts and open your wallets. And Dr. Spargimino, wonderful man of God, worked with Southwest Radio for 25 years now. By Faith, a Bible study on Hebrews. He's got a verse-by-verse commentary on Revelation, very great one, called No Uncertain Future. We know where this world is going. We know the future that we have in Jesus Christ. It's the revelation of Jesus Christ. That's a wonderful book by our own Dr. Larry Spargimino. I mentioned Calvinism on Trial, which is meant to give the average Christian, you hear people talk about tulip, and his subtitle is This Tulip Has Thorns. He grew up in the Reformed movement. He was saved into a Reformed Presbyterian church, and then he went to a Reformed Baptist and was a pastor in the Reformed Baptist movement. And then he went on and saw the light, so to speak, and came out of that, and this is what this book is about. Yes, brother. It is. Thank you for that testimony. He's also got a similar book called Preterism on Trial. Preterism is the view that everything in Bible prophecy was fulfilled by 70 A.D., and he tears that apart in Preterism on Trial. J.R. Church was the founder of Prophecy in the News magazine. We just released a biography based on a lot of his writings that we discovered. Keep looking up. That was his favorite phrase. And it's a wonderful read. You'll get to see firsthand the life, the ministry of the Prophecy in the News founder, Dr. J.R. Church. So, with that being said, let's take a break. We'll start our next session here in about 15, 20 minutes. Let's get up, stretch your legs, go downstairs, and stretch your wallets and everything else.